Fab. Okay, so we'll make a start then, if that's all right. So welcome then to the third week of this module. This term is going quite quickly. And yeah, we've got about a month, I think, before we do the in-class test, which I'll come back to later on in terms of if anyone's got any questions. As I said, realistically, just to kind of look back to show that those transcript and summaries are up there, and I will do the same moving forward every week, just in case they are helpful. Just picking up on a couple of things as well. We mentioned last week you were doing all sorts of things in relation to what you thought schools were. What's the purpose of education? Was it the same for everyone? Should it be the same? Should we be thinking about equity rather than sameness, for example? And then one of the last things you did, you had the opportunity to stick a comment up onto the discussion. Now, we said with these discussions I will put more of these on as we go through, because they do relate to different aspects of the assignment rather than anything else. So it's kind of a way to do a bit of background reading and think about something that might be useful. I did say though, with these discussions, these were nice if you had the chance to do them rather than an expectation, but a couple of you had posted something on there, and I've just popped a very quick reply basically to say thank you in terms of engaging. So you had the chance then to kind of look at that David Mitchell chapter, thinking about those different propositions towards inclusive education. So there were different ones like, should it be all learners together in mainstream school, which is perhaps the biggest debate of it. And then one person then chose proposition 1, which is a really interesting proposition, thinking about intersectionality. So if you are a learner with additional learning need, then potentially if you also live in poverty, if you also live in certain parts of the country, if you also attend certain types of settings, other particular characteristics, then those challenges might be exacerbated as a result. And then someone had done the proposition 2, talking about there is general agreement that inclusive education is a good thing, but what it is and how we actually do it in practice is open to debate and is challenging. So thank you very much for posting both of those. Thinking about the essays coming in May, both of those could fit in quite nicely if you looked at the kind of inclusion topic. Or potentially could fit in with the others as well. So thinking about the role of the educator, for example, looking at proposition 1, do staff within schools have that knowledge and understanding of intersectionality which informs their practice? If they do, does that have an impact upon learners? Or you could look at that in terms of the environment. So might you, for example, being taught in a 60 school primary school in rural Wales, have more or less access to different types of resources and opportunities based on your physical location compared to somebody who goes to a 1,000 pupil primary school in a city, Cardiff, for example. Okay, so as I said, I just wanted to note that I had noted those points and to say thank you for posting them. Again, I will put some more of these discussions up, and again it will be a case of, if you want to engage with them, brilliant. If you don't, you don't have to, but there may be something in there that's useful to refer back on in terms of assignments going forward. Okay, so I think that's kind of all I wanted to wrap up from last week, realistically. So we're going to move on then this week to think a little bit more about inclusion. And then next week we're going to start to focus, as we said, on different areas of additional learning need. So I'm not saying these are the ones that are definitely in the test, but you know, it's likely that they may well be. So we're going to focus on specific learning differences and dyslexia in particular next week. And what we'll do across each of the next 3 weeks is think a little bit about, this is an area of need, what might be perceptions around it, what might be potential causes, what might be impacts upon learners, and what might be useful in terms of support and intervention and strategies. Okay, now when we get to those areas of need, each of those areas of need is realistically a master's degree in its own right. So at one point, for example, I used to teach a 3-year master's program which just looked at dyslexia. You can do a 3-year master's program that just looks at ASD, for example. So I'm aware we're going to go over these in very, very shallow detail when we get to them, but hopefully there's helpful in terms of this is what it is, this is how a learner might be impacted either negatively or positively. This, as a teacher or somebody working with these learners, this is what we might need to pay attention to, and here are some simplistic strategies that might be helpful and may, for example, fit in with lesson plans that you're thinking about going forward. Okay, so today then we're just going to start off thinking a little bit about recapping what we looked at last time, which was inclusion, and then we thought a little bit about labels, and then what we're going to move on to today is to think about inclusion in terms of whether it means place. So a lot of definitions, when you start to take a look through these, talk about inclusion means all learners together in mainstream school, or all learners together in the same mainstream class within the mainstream school. And then we looked at that diagram last week where we had different ways potentially of grouping learners and thinking about whether those were inclusion or not. And what we're going to think a little bit this morning about is the potential role of special schools. So on one sense, thinking about that diagram we looked at last week, those learners are segregated, they are excluded in the sense that they're not taught in a mainstream school. However, is there an argument that those learners are also included even though it's in a separate, segregated setting? So we're going to kind of unpick, I suppose, a little bit that definition of inclusion. Is it too narrow to just see inclusion as being in mainstream school? My personal opinion, for what it's worth, which isn't a lot, is yes, that is too narrow. But is there still an argument for having special schools? Are they beneficial? Are they a challenge? Do they have a positive impact on learners or not? Should we shut them all down like some countries have done? Should we keep them open and potentially think about working with these in a different way like other countries have done? So, for example, making stronger links between mainstream schools and perhaps a feeder special school. Okay, so that's what we're going to kind of take a look at. We looked at this diagram last week when we introduced inclusion to some extent, and we said that within education in the UK we've gone through different various stages of this diagram. So we said then the kind of the triangle, the whatever those other squiggly bits outside the blue circle, realistically those were learners today that we would see as being having a disability or having additional learning needs or special education needs, for example. So when we set up schools and education systems initially, there was no expectation that those learners would attend education. And when we looked at labels last week, one of the ones you might have remembered off the slide was uneducable. So there was a kind of suggestion that there were some learners that there was no point in sending them to school because they would not be able to engage with education and learning, therefore places were not available and schools were not informed with those needs in mind. So what we did have initially was some learners would attend school, as we said, initially up until the age of 10, then up until the age of 11. Before, in between the wars, it went up as far as 14, for example. Following World War II, we started to see the introduction of secondary schools, and you might have come across the tripartite school system before. So thinking about kind of the comprehensive schools, thinking about grammar schools, and the other type of school which we didn't have that many of was secondary modern schools, for example. And very much your life path was kind of set out for you, partly in terms of where you lived and partly in terms of your family circumstances, thinking back to some of those intersectionality points that someone made on the discussion from last week, but largely to do with your performance on the 11+ exam. So realistically, around the age of your 11th birthday, your life plan potentially was mapped out for you based on how you did on a particular set of attainment tests. Now, some parts of the UK still have selective grammar schools. I think parts of the southeast of England have these. It's still quite common in the Northern Irish education system, for example. We have very few grammar schools in Wales, and Wales very much has kind of a comprehensive education system, and there are all sorts of people who are for and against in terms of, has it given equal opportunities to people, has it driven standards down? So there's all sorts of different debates around that. We suggested then that kind of from the mid-19-teens onwards, there was a recognition that uneducable was not an appropriate place to be. Therefore, there should be some form of education provision for all learners. However, this now may be in a separate setting. And we start to move into that middle circle on the bottom where we seem to have segregated education. So we said that bigger kind of blue circle was still mainstream school. So your local comprehensive school, your local grammar school, your local primary school. And then that smaller circle meant a special school setting. Okay, so all learners now were entitled to an education. However, not all learners were taught in the same setting. So you can look at it in one sense and go, well, great, these learners are now receiving an education which they wouldn't have done before. However, other people will look at that and go, well, actually the problem there is that these learners are segregated. And we see these learners as being different, therefore we put them somewhere different, which reinforces that sense of difference. And very often when we look at labels, what we are looking at is perceived deficit. Okay, so some parts of the world have kind of moved away from special schools. We do still have that dual system in many parts of the UK. Despite the fact that education in Wales has been striving to become more inclusive in recent years, we've actually had a growth in the number of learners who attend in special school rather than a reduction, which I don't think anyone saw come in at the time. However, whether that's a good thing or a bad thing potentially depends upon your perceptions. Third approach then we saw was perhaps integration. Now, when we use the terms integration and inclusion, it's quite common that people use these terms interchangeably, even though they are underpinned by very different concepts realistically. So if we are thinking about integration, for example, what we tend to think about there is, to know what, as a mainstream school, we will take a learner regardless of their needs, but the expectation is that the learner must fit in with what we offer. So the onus on fitting in is very much put on to the learner. So when I used to work in a pupil referral unit, for example, most of those learners were never going back to mainstream school, and in all honesty never wanted to. However, if they did, they had to make a reintegration process. In other words, they had to prove to the school that they were now willing to fit in with what the school was able to offer them, rather than the school going, okay, we are also happy to tweak and amend what we offer to you as well. And I always felt that was very unfair, and maybe what we should be thinking about was re-inclusion as a concept rather than reintegration. And when we think about inclusion, realistically, what we're thinking about there, I suppose, is more of that kind of two-way focus. Yes, there's an expectation that learners will fit in with school norms. However, there is that recognition that schools have control over their environments to some extent, and therefore also need potentially to amend and tweak what they offer to learners as well. Okay, so when we talked about integration, what we are thinking about here perhaps is learners being placed in mainstream school. And when we look at the diagram there, you can see that we've still got that boundary around those learners. So those special learners who used to be segregated and taught somewhere else are now within the mainstream school or mainstream school system, but maybe still be separated. So as I've said before, I'm an old man now. I started teaching back in 1996. The secondary school that I worked in was a really, really nice secondary school, and upstairs, behind an almost secret corridor to get there, they used to have the special needs class. And realistically, those learners would attend that class with the same member of staff and would probably stay there for the 5 years they were in that secondary school for. So they were in the mainstream school, but very much separated from mainstream peers. Okay, today we still see this to some extent. Many schools do still have specialist teaching facilities, for example. So a large number of primary schools in Swansea do operate these. We also see schools having things like nurture classes or nurture groups, where potentially that learner is separated from peers for part of the day or part of their journey through school. So it's an attempt to kind of keep them within the secondary school very often, but there is still that element of separation. So they are within the mainstream school, but not necessarily a part of everything. And then when we're thinking about inclusion, maybe what a lot of the definitions refer to is that kind of top diagram. So all learners together in mainstream school, which possibly also means all learners together mixed in mainstream classes with no borders or boundaries around learners. And in theory, potentially, I would say that sounds great. However, in practice, is it that simple? And realistically, I think one of the discussion points that people raised was in terms of how do we do it is actually very complicated in practice. And teaching on the National Masters, for example, on Saturday, the module I was in was called Leadership and Management of ALN. This master's degree, they're all teachers or teaching assistants or tutors, for example, from right across Wales. And one of the people we had on the call was our Ask the Expert guest speaker, and she was an ALN advisory teacher from Ceredigion in kind of mid-Wales, and she was talking very much about this in terms of, in her opinion, very often what she found in schools was, yes, okay, we've taken these learners, they're with us, with us. However, that was not by itself inclusion. Okay, so we'll think a little bit about that a bit more as we go through today, and whether, for example, I'm just going to pick on somebody at random, that yellow triangle person there, for example, are they being included because they're in mainstream school, or just because they're being in mainstream school? Is placement enough? Equally, might that yellow triangle there, might that person, yes, they are segregated or separated to some extent, but might they also be included? Okay, so when we are looking at what we're going to focus on today, I suppose what we're unpicking a bit more is, does inclusion just mean mainstream school? Just because you're in a mainstream school, does it mean that you are included? Or can you be included in different types of settings? And then last week we also looked at this a little bit in terms of terminology and labels. We talked very briefly about how some labels had changed over time, so we don't have labels like uneducable anymore. We don't use terminology in the UK like educationally subnormal, or mentally retarded, for example, or spastic or cripple. However, these have all been kind of official terms that people have been identified with in the past. And what we mentioned briefly, I suppose, towards the end of the last week is very much these labels come from a deficit perspective. When we are kind of putting labels on people, what we're trying to do very often is find out what is wrong, which in one sense, don't an argument about. You know, if you weren't feeling very well and you went to the doctor, you do want to know what is wrong. However, maybe when we're thinking about learners and their needs, what we shouldn't be thinking about is deficit and what is wrong, but rather than what is different, or what do we as a setting need to do differently to meet these learners' needs. And we'll talk in the second half of the module about things like the medical model and the social model and how those impact upon staff's perspectives, for example. But when we think about labels in particular, very often we are thinking about deficit. So we are thinking about what is it that the learner can't do. Very often we miss out those strengths. And even today, when we look at some of the evaluations of the ALN changes in Wales, for example, so there are a couple of Estyn reports that I think have popped up on Canvas previously. One of the things that teachers have said was, yes, we think things have changed in practice, but still there is a feeling at least that before learners can get support, they need assessment and they need that label to be attached before it comes. And because there are all sorts of different in practice depending upon where you live, there's all sorts of challenges around waiting lists, for example. So ASD waiting lists were 7, 8, 9 years long at one point in different parts of Wales. Potentially those learners whose needs only became apparent when they went to secondary school because the environment was more challenging had actually left childhood and left education before receiving a diagnosis. So do we leave those learners struggling realistically throughout education because they don't have that label which informs support? Thinking about the impact of labels, we will pick these up in the future, but there are all sorts of challenges and all sorts of debates about whether labels are advantageous or not. So in terms of a learner having a label, some people see it as an advantage in that there is an understanding of what that learner's needs are. However, do all staff have the same shared understanding of what that label means? Okay. Is there kind of an understanding that we see the label first rather than the learner? So do we see the autistic individual rather than the individual who isn't autistic? Do we see the need, not the person behind it? And there are all sorts of impacts in terms of self-esteem, for example. So there is research which suggests that some learners, once they've received that label, have a boost to self-esteem because it kind of explains some of the challenges that they'd experienced previously. Potentially there is some strength to be gathered from that label that's been attached to you. So we talked in another module about neurodiversity, for example, and neurodivergent as a terminology and whether there was a sense of kind of positivity linked to that. However, there are other labels potentially where I think it's quite difficult to get any positivity from. So a previous label used to be maladjusted, which became social, emotional, behavioural difficulties, for example. So I think it's quite difficult for people to feel positive towards some labels compared to others. We can also think a little bit in terms, for example, of do labels influence staff, even subconsciously, in terms of their aspirations and expectations they have of their learners. We see that learner who has a label, do we see that even subconsciously as this learner is going to struggle or this learner has a deficit? Therefore, does that set into being something called the teacher expectancy effect? Right? Or the Pygmalion effect, we see it in literature sometimes. You see that person, you have a lowered expectation of what they can do based upon your understanding of a label they have, and you almost kind of teach down to that label, which means there's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy in terms of what that learner achieves or not. And we'll also focus in the future on things like self-fulfilling prophecy, locus of control, for example, as well. So we've kind of recapped inclusion briefly, we've recapped labelling very briefly, and we also looked at this slide last week, which I think is a really telling statement. If a plant was wilting, we wouldn't look to diagnose it with wilting plant syndrome, we would change its conditions. Do we do that in education when we're thinking about learners? This learner is not achieving in my classroom. Is it because there is something wrong with that learner and I need to find out and diagnose what is wrong with them? Or is it something to do with that interaction between the learner, me and the environment, and can we tweak and adapt to fit that learner in? Okay. So moving on today then, we're going to think a little bit about the roles of special schools and whether, if inclusion means mainstream school only, is there still a place for special schools? Should special schools still exist? Should we shut them down? Should we keep them open? Should we think about using them in a different way? And just to kind of set this into context a little bit, what I've got on the slide, I don't know how well you can see this, is some of the results from the most recently published school census in Wales. So the 2026 figures won't be released until July, but every year in January, so it is the 20th of January this year, all schools have to send in their data, which is the PLASC data, the pupil level something that I've forgotten, which basically shares information with Welsh Government about how many learners they have, how many teachers they have, how many learners are entitled to free school meals, how many learners of ALN, for example. Okay, and I think it's quite interesting looking at these figures in terms of seeing different trends that emerge. So just to give you some context, what we've got on the kind of the middle column there is the number of different types of schools in Wales. So Wales in January 2025 had about 1,440 different types of schools. My maths isn't great, I'm not going to count those up now, but roughly. And very few nursery schools, so only 6 nursery-only schools across Wales, taught 431 pupils, and that was a reduction from the year before. 1,199 primary schools. The year before there was 1,210. So we'd lost 11 primary schools, and there had been a drop in the number of learners attending primary school as well. So all sorts of things you've probably seen on the news about kind of declining birth rates and the impact of that on school populations, for example. Middle schools, slightly different, I suppose, to how these are conceptualised in parts of England. So middle schools in England are what, year 8, 9, 10, 11, something like that, is it? 7, 8, 9, 7 to 11, yeah. Okay, so it's the kind of that key stage 3 age range, isn't it? When we're thinking about middle schools in Wales, I suppose what we're looking at here are through schools, so 3 to 16 or 3 to 18. So that kind of campus where the primary and secondary schools are amalgamated into one setting. So it's not everyone together in the same building necessarily, but you've got the two kind of schools in tandem with each other. And we've seen an increase here, so potentially as some of those primary schools have declined, what we see in parts of Wales, especially Powys, for example, which is quite rural, is that kind of growth in middle schools. So we've seen an increase in learners attending such schools. The number of secondary schools has dropped slightly, as has the number of learners. The number of special schools has stayed the same. So we have 39 different special schools across Wales, but the number of learners has gone up by about 200. So one of the aims, I think, of the ALN transformation in Wales and also the new curriculum in Wales was that mainstream schools should be more inclusive to more learners. However, we're starting to see an increase in the number of learners who are attending special school. And depending upon whether that's a positive or a negative, I suppose, depends upon your perspective on inclusion. And then the other thing I've put on there is pupil referral units. Now we'll look at these again in the future. There's 22 of these in Wales. There's 22 local authorities in Wales. Some local authorities have none. Some have multiple, so I think there are 4 in Swansea, for example. Some local authorities have residential pupil referral units. In most cases, they are kind of day settings. And difficult to find figures in terms of this because some learners are dual registered, so they stay on their mainstream school role but are also classed as attending the PRU. Some people are only attending the PRU, some people slip through gaps. So we've probably got about 1,000 learners-ish attending PRUs, meaning we've got nearly 7,500 children in Wales out of about 400 and something thousand who attend education who are not taught in mainstream schools. So a relatively small number in terms of 7,500 out of 450 odd thousand, but still a significant number of people attending special or alternative settings. So what I'm going to do in a moment is give you a break from my voice for about 20 minutes or so, and I'm going to show you part of a video clip. Now I apologise, I can't remember whether I've shown you this before. I know I haven't shown you this on this module, but I've shown this clip in a few places, and if you have seen this already, I apologise in advance. But what I'm going to show you is part of a documentary which is looking at Ysgol y Derry, which is one of the largest special schools in the UK. Now, Ysgol y Derry has been part of a BBC documentary series called A Special School, which has been off and on BBC for about the last 5 years or so. So the clip I'm going to show you this morning is the first episode of the first series. I think it was filmed probably just before COVID, but it's still going, and I think it's really interesting. And what I would really like, realistically, I think, is anyone who works in a mainstream school and has only ever worked in a mainstream school to kind of watch this and experience this, to see how things are done differently in different places. And I think there's things that different types of schools can kind of pick up and learn from each other, realistically. So I'm just going to play you a part of this clip. It's not the greatest quality in terms of sound. It used to be available on BBC, and I can't find it on there now, so I found quite a dodgy YouTube clip, which is somebody has filmed themselves watching it, but you can get the gist in terms of what they're showing. And what I'm going to ask you to do when you're kind of watching this is to have these questions in mind, and in particular the first three, I suppose. So looking at this clip, so realistically what we've got is this. So learners who are outside of mainstream school, therefore they are separated, they are segregated. And one of the challenges very often is that special schools are quite few and far between. And what we tend to have very often is learners who are kind of bussed out or transported out of their home community to attend a special setting which can be some distance away. Okay, so in some cases 40, 50, 60 miles away from home. So there is that kind of separation from siblings who go to the mainstream school, separation from peers who live in your local street or your local village who go to the same school. You are sent somewhere different because you are seen as different, or your needs are different. So when we watch this, what I'd like you to do is just to kind of make some initial thoughts really of what are your initial impressions of the learners themselves. Okay, now I know this is kind of slightly false, this kind of, it is a proper documentary, so the cameras are in, so there may be bits that, are biased as a result, but what are your initial impressions of the learners that we see? So when we think about inclusion, what does that mean? Okay, does it mean, like some of you said last week, it's learners thriving? Is it learners achieving? Is it learners being happy? Is it learners feeling part of a community? Is it having their needs met? So what are your initial impressions of the pupils? Do they feel happy? What sort of needs might they have? What do you think about the staff that we see? So do they have a particular perspective or attitude that that comes across? Anything in terms of parents? Okay, so what do the parents think about their children attending this special separate setting? Are they happy that they are attending school, or are they annoyed because they've been sent there rather than their local school, for example? Also like you to have a quick think about the school environment itself. So last week we did that activity, what does a school look like and what does it contain, for example. So what does this school look like? Does it look the same as or different to a mainstream school? So one of the key things we see at the start, for example, is the width of the corridors are much bigger than what you'd normally have to accommodate people with different kind of mobility issues. What have we got outside? Okay, it's got a playground. Does it have specific equipment that might not be available in different settings? And then the other thing I'm going to ask you to think about is, do you think this school promotes inclusion? Okay, now this one perhaps is a bit more of a personal perspective. There's no right answer to this one. You could argue it either way. And when we kind of get to the end of that, what I'm going to ask you to do, if you don't mind, is just pop some notes up onto a Padlet. So I'll share the link again a little bit later. But realistically, the Padlet that I'm going to ask you to fill in this morning is, I will get to it eventually, is this one here, which is on the additional learning resources page for today. And what we've got on here are a number of different levels, and what we're going to do first of all is look at the first 3. Okay, we'll then move on in a bit to think about some of the later ones. Good morning, Agaga. How are you?
I'm sorry for coming late today again.
That's okay. Come in, please join us.
Thank you.
Do you know, that was really good time when we were just about to start to watch a video about something. All right, so yeah, just to set it in context, Agaga, what we've spent the last few minutes doing basically is recapping some of the points we looked at last week about what is inclusion and some of the labels that learners are given. And we've just gone through and looked at some figures about schools in Wales, which says most children go to mainstream school, but there are a significant minority of children who go to special settings. So what we're going to look at shortly is a video showing a special school in Wales. It's just outside Cardiff. It's called Ysgol y Derry, which is the biggest special school in the UK, or at least it was at the time. Since this clip was filmed, they've now taken over 4 other sites, and they now have 5 different bits to this school, so they've kind of expanded even further. And what we'll see, I suppose, is the wide range of needs these learners are facing, and what we're going to think about when we watch it, Agaga, is when you see the pupils, what are your initial impressions about them? Do they seem happy? Do they seem to feel a sense of belonging? Do their needs seem to be met? Are they disappointed that they're not in their local school with their local friends, for example? What do the staff come across like? Is there anything different there to how you'd expect staff to be doing in mainstream school, for example? So what you will see, I think, which shocks some people, is it is quite hands-on and it's quite huggy, for example, which probably would be frowned on a bit more in terms of mainstream schools, for example. And then what's the school environment look like? Okay, and what we're going to do then a little bit later, once we've watched it, is think a little bit more about, are these learners included, or because they're being taught somewhere different, are they excluded? And then we're going to think a little bit about what can mainstream schools learn from special schools and vice versa. Are there advantages to attending different types of settings? Are there disadvantages? And then we're going to kind of wrap it up with this question at the end, really. How do you think education systems could best meet the needs of all learners? So this video clip I'm going to show you is about 20, well, it's longer than 20 minutes. I'm going to not show it all to you. Before we do that, though, I am going to overshare and say I'm a middle-aged man and I need the loo before we press start. So if anyone else needs a quick comfort break before I share this, I will.
So today is the first day of a new term, the end of the glorious 6, as the teachers say, you know, in the beginning of work again, and the joyful day for all parents, I'm sure. Can you move down, please?
Chaos in the morning, this morning, because we've obviously had the holidays. But for me, I'm really proud he's gone into year 3. It's a miracle for him.
It is emotional seeing her go off, and I can't quite believe she's actually going to 6th form.
Right, I'm off.
But she is. I love you too. Right, I'll see you after school. Exciting day.
Like a mainstream school where you know the kids are going to come in, maybe line up in their classes, we'll walk in together.
Right, let's go, guys.
Kids will come, go where they want to. Perhaps not go in, perhaps stay outside for a bit, perhaps run off. So you generally sort of see staff running in all sorts of directions.
This is a Scholar Dairy in the town of Penarth, just outside Cardiff.
1, 2, 3, scream!
Since opening its doors 5 years ago, it's now Britain's biggest special education school.
Walk the corridors and
Just when you think you know everything about them, they do something that really surprises you.
For the first time, cameras have captured the reality of life in one of our most ambitious schools. Pushing the boundaries of what's possible in special education.
we all know what these children can't do. They get told every day what they can't do. When they go out to society, they know what they can't do. So we've got to cultivate what they can do.
We all just want them to do the best they can possibly do and create some great memories.
It's a special school, so that's the first thing. It's huge in terms of special school numbers. We're about 275 to 280 pupils, which is really big. We've got different ages 3 to 19, all sorts of disabilities and all sorts of learning difficulties and challenges, a very, very wide range, and probably unique in the country. A hugely wide range of ability, which ranges from pre-national curriculum up to A-level. Okay, so we're going to announce head boy and head girl for 2019-2020. So, the young man with the most votes was Richard Lewis. Where are you? Richard Lewis. How's it feel? Speechless. Speechless. What's your mother going to say? You know this means, don't you? You're going to have to be good all year. You sure? You sure? It's going to be tough. All you're going to do here, can't be up down. Can't be up to. Here you go, fella. Head boy. Okay, so the young lady in our school with the most votes, and this is a young lady who I've seen a completely different side to in the last year. Rolling, come on. Okay, right, how do you feel? Yeah, that's for you. All right. You're going to keep an eye on him. Right, and make sure he behaves. I don't know if he behaves, but it's going to go. Here we go then. Head boy, head girl.
Look at the beautiful view. Somebody's got to have a selfie with that. Well done, right. 1, 2, 3, you're first.
The pupils in the Scholar Dairy are divided into classes that best suit their personality, individual needs, and ability. There's always a mix of characters.
Harvey, are you struggling with the terrain? They've never all been in class together this morning. We've got one new student who's never been in school. She's been home tutored because of their anxiety. So it looked like it was silly this morning, but it was trying to make them feel relaxed and comfortable with each other. It's very difficult for them to make firm friends because of their locality, because they're all transported in from different areas. So that's what's different. It's not like a local comprehensive where they can all socialise. So this is their social life as well.
what we can do to proactively help them. All behaviour is functional, it's a communication.
In the past, 12-year-old Maya has found it hard to manage her temper, but since working in the behaviour team at Ysgol Dairy, she has started to turn things around.
Is it bronze? Is it silver? And is it gold? Why in the stickers? It's such a simple idea, but the effect that it has had is just amazing. Right over there. I haven't had talking. I haven't been naughty the first day. I got all goats last week, and I still haven't goats. The pride that she's got in that she knows that she's made this change and she's doing so well, that's really nice as well. She nice, she kind, she happy. She's like Jesus, she's the thing that's her body. That is a compliment, this is. I'm not trying to go to Jesus before I've got that.
Outside, Craig has been called to a disagreement that has escalated on the playground.
Joseph has autism, so he does like things resolve things in structured ways. So when this thing happens, unless it's resolved, that will carry on happening. If no one's around, then Joseph will probably escalate and potentially physically hit other people. If you see this car is safe, you need to make sure that you don't see it out. It's not just something that we use in school, we use throughout life, really, how to interact and how we to be when we're upset about this interaction.
When you see a child progressing and you know that it's something specifically that you've put in place, something specifically that we've done as a school that's helped build up a little bit that was maybe lacking, I think it makes you feel proud. It does, it makes you feel proud of doing your job. So, it makes you want to keep doing that and keep doing it for the next child every year.
4 weeks into the term and the first school trip is on the horizon. A visit to an outdoor activity centre in Exmoor.
This is the biggest trip that we run as a school. It honestly does take about 9 months to get everything sorted for it.
Okay, I'm just going to pause that there for a second. So nearly 10 minutes in, then any initial thoughts about what you've seen so far in terms of pupils, in terms of staff, in terms of ethos possibly, in terms of resources, anything positive, anything negative that kind of springs to mind?
I don't know whether I have a bias from working in special schools and like STS, but it's just really nice to like the way that they organise the classes. I think is really important by the personality of all the different children, because like it's just, they don't care what other needs the other children have. They're just like working in their friendships and themselves. So like I love stuff that makes me emotional. But this documentary series is really great.
Yeah, thank you very much, Flo. So I think that's a really interesting point. So last week when you were talking about what do schools look like, for example, we talked a little bit about how we group learners, and we said very often that's to do by age. So if you happen to be born within a particular range of months, then you're in the same class as each other. However, as you said there, Flo, that kind of goes out the window realistically. So an expectation that those groups might be some age element of it. We're not going to have an 8-year-old in with a 17-year-old, but some of the characteristics about picking the groups are more to do with personality. So are these children going to get on with each other? Are these children going to understand each other? Are these children going to complement each other? as well as need as well. And I think what the teacher at the start was talking about when she gave them the iPad, I thought was really telling. You know what, we are aware that these children are being bussed in from elsewhere. We need to spend time making sure that they see this as building their community and having time for those social opportunities as well. So thank you for sharing that, Flo. Anybody else got any kind of thoughts, Ogaga?
I saw the human relationship between the staff and the kids. They are having relationship, the bonding, and giving the kids listening ears, interaction, having proper interaction with the kids to make sure they are okay and supporting.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So yeah, the importance of relationships between the staff and the students in terms of that. Yes, there are challenges, but you could see with Joseph, for example, and the behaviour support teacher, Craig, there was that element of trust between them. You saw the head boy kind of going up and hugging the head teacher, for example. There was obviously that bond between them. So highlighting the importance of human interaction and building those positive relationships. Perhaps more difficult, perhaps arguably in secondary schools where you see 150, 200 pupils during the week. You have them for an hour and then they go off to someone else. So maybe easier to some extent, but should it be? Okay, so thank you both for sharing. Tia, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think for our success of the staff are close to the big girls.
Yeah.
Therefore, they recognise individual needs, so they're able to meet those needs.
Nice, thank you very much. So they know each other well, they know the learners well, therefore they can focus on the individual needs of the learner. Brilliant. Alex, anything to finish off?
Yeah. It's nice to see how they're meeting the kids' needs. Like obviously they're not wearing uniforms.
No.
You would see mainstream. So that kind of helps with sensory needs. They're listening, they're trying to understand and meet those needs. It's great to see how they're doing that.
Brilliant, thank you very much. And the one thing that I really love from that clip is the head teacher at the start who talks about, we focus very much on what these learners can do. They know full well what they can't do. Society tells them what they can't do. What we focus on is what they can do and the positives, which I think is brilliant. Okay, so we're going to move on now then. The next few bits of the clip show partly some of these learners going off on an outdoor pursuits residential trip. And you've seen some of the needs and the physical mobility issues of some of those learners. I would say some of those learners, being in a mainstream school, the decision would be taken to know what is just too difficult to take those learners out. So what we're going to do is either we're going to take the rest of the class and these learners don't go, or just we're not going to go. So I think it's really positive that they kind of try and take these learners and give them these opportunities. And we're also going to see a couple of learners perhaps who've got very specific needs, quite complex challenges, and thinking about what learning and engagement looks like for those learners and whether actually could those learners' needs be met in mainstream school, or actually is that outside of the resourcing and the understanding and training of staff in mainstream schools, for example. Okay, so I'll carry on with the next bit.
Some sort of medication. We've got something that that we've got to take this for them. You'll see people running around chasing the kids, trying to find them to give them what they need.
Gives all pupils and residents experience, which is really, I think, important for kids' education and people's educations as they grow up. I guess it gives a parents a bit of a break as well.
You are going to go on pay. Jake's going on his first residential trip away. It's going to be his first night away from the family ever, without the family going with him. I'm jealous. Now, can you sneak me in already?
I'm a bit anxious. Because I wouldn't feel like that sometimes, but I think it's going to be great for him. I mean, I think it's going to be great. It's just going to keep a smile for a week and not stress, and we'll be fine now.
You're at least on the front and no hacks. You are ready to go, Jacob. On your trip away. Jacob was born with quadriplegic cerebral palsy, so he's never known any different. But he's a 16-year-old boy, and anything we can do that normalises his 16-year-old life, we try to do. I don't know. Jacob. It's very hard to do it like for us, like with one child, let alone like for the 30 children I'm going. Don't know how they're gonna do it. It's just mind blowing.
Yeah, it's ambitious to do it. It's ambitious to do it all week. And it's ambitious to take that many pupils away in one go. I say to Josie, I don't know why you're 27 through this. I don't know many teams who do it.
While some of the pupils head off for their adventure, Lisa Reese Renshaw continues her daily role in helping children who are non-verbal to communicate.
What's it? Can you tell me?
Joshua Blake's co-find.
This is Finley. Finley is just starting to use some cool vocabulary and some choices that he likes things to watch, because that's watching things is his motivation. And he knows that's Joshua, so he's just choosing his videos that he wants to watch, and what we're trying to do then is model the next stage. So he's just pointing to the thing he wants, but then so we're saying, I want something.
Joshua Blake's co-find.
Seeing their faces when they know that you've understood them, you can't put into words, and to know you're part of it is just amazing. Hi, Felix. Felix, how are you doing? I just made my glasses a bit. Do you want to come and use the fireworks game? Should we go look around? He's got Medicare syndrome, so basically he has a smooth brain. So we have, folds and grooves in our brain. He doesn't have that at all. So he's completely smooth. So yeah, he's a little bit curly. He's during his age and his seconds. So one of his prognosis is during this condition, don't live past infancy. I don't think he would be here if it wasn't for the school. They're definitely a big part of his life, yeah.
Felix is a very special boy. He's one of the lots of wonderful people in the school. And everything he's doing now, even though they're small things to people, for Felix they are massive things. So what we're going to do today is see if you can choose something from one side of the screen. You're going to look back to the other side of the screen to see what you've chosen. So we're going to do a fireworks game today. Do you remember what we have to do? Lisa has been teaching Felix to use an eye gaze device. The software allows Felix to control a cursor and make choices using his eyes. Can I see your eyes moving across the screen? Good boy. That's it. That's one. Try to the challenge of finding a way to get them to communicate.
Okay, just going to pause there again. So we saw Finley and we saw Felix there. So realistically, two learners, quite complex needs. Thinking about Felix, for example, as his mum said, children with that condition don't normally live past infancy. However, Felix and his mum had been interviewed on the BBC last year, for example, some 6 years after that. And they were talking about how education was supporting Felix, but some of the challenges that he still faced. So when we were thinking about terminology kind of last week and at the recap today, realistically, I suppose Felix and Finley would have been learners 100 years ago who would have seen as being uneducable. There was no point in teaching those learners. They wouldn't have had the expectation that they could learn. However, as the teacher kind of said there, do you know what they do in those achievements, they might be seen as being really small to some people, they're still achievements. So thinking about kind of the bigger question, for example, do you think Finley or Felix, could their needs be met in their local primary school, for example?
I would like to think that if there was an initiative and if they wanted to, they could meet those needs, like with extra resources and like specialist teacher training. But I think in cases like this, like a special school, it can like provide the space and the time that like those kids and those families need, so they don't feel like they have to keep catching up with everyone else. Or like, say if like Felix, like there was a school trip that they had wanted to go on, but like it actually like it was in such a way that it could involve all the other children in mainstream school, but it couldn't involve Felix, and that was chosen by the children, like, and because they wasn't educated about it.
Yep.
I think like places like this and environments like this, they like give the space and the time so they feel like they're not behind on anything, they don't have to catch up or anything like that.
No.
But yeah.
Thank you very much for us. So I think that's a really complex, really nice answer, actually. So potentially we could look at this and go, do you know what, there's no reason why they couldn't attend their local school, providing that staff had training, providing that there was resources, providing that there was the equipment that was there. However, is that feasible in all school settings? Okay, some of the equipment we see in the school is incredibly expensive. We saw a lot of the learners that have got medical as well as educational needs, and in kind of later episodes we see people with kind of hoists and wet rooms and all sorts of challenges. Is that beyond the budget of all schools to be able to put that into place? Thinking outside of education, for example, in other sectors like health, it's quite common in health that what we do is different hospitals specialise in different needs. So rather than your local hospital being able to specialise in everything, potentially, so thinking about Wales, I live in Pembrokeshire, my local hospital is Withybush Hospital. It's kind of a general hospital, it doesn't specialise in anything. If you have a child with particular medical needs, for example, you would be expected to attend Glangwili Hospital in Carmarthen. So that's kind of a 45-mile drive from my house. So it's not convenient in one sense. However, the specialist resources are available there. If you have a heart attack in Wales, then potentially you would go to one particular hospital. If you have a head injury, you would go to another hospital. So in other settings and other contexts, that kind of specialism being located in one specific physical location is quite normal. However, when we're thinking about education, if the argument is that special schools are not appropriate, can we actually replicate all that specialism across every one of those 1,400 schools in Wales when they need it? And thinking about how different cohorts of pupils change over time, for example. Okay, so we're going to finish off watching this bit of the video now, and what we're going to see is these learners now going off to an outdoor pursuit residential trip. And like the family was talking about it, you know what, as a family we find it really hard to go out together. I can only imagine how difficult it is for the school. Okay, so realistically, why is it so difficult? Is it because as a society, a lot of what we have in place does not think about the needs of everyone? Okay, and what we'll see perhaps when we look at this centre is maybe it is a kind of a specialist centre, but does it kind of meet the needs of everyone without having to kind of adapt? Okay, so let's watch this next bit. Sorry, it's a bit glitchy.
challenges and experiences. The nice is, Jacob and the mice he kept going. It's pretty extreme stuff, you know, like canoeing and the zip line, and there's all kinds of like sensory experiences that they aren't getting anywhere else. The whole place revolves around them, much more than anywhere else they've ever been before. They feel included, maybe one of the first times they feel like, you know, like properly part of a group. It's not like they're doing an activity and it's being like tailored for them. It's like they're doing an activity at the same level that everybody else is doing an activity. Everyone is contributing and getting the same amount of experience. And that is the most important thing.
Right, I'm going to pause it there. Sorry, it's really glitchy this morning. Okay, so we've seen a bit about the school. We've seen a little bit about some of the complex needs some of those learners have and experience, and some of the resources that might be needed. We've now seen that group of learners, so slightly different ages, all sorts of different challenges, been taken out on that residential experience. It got very glitchy at that point, I do apologise. But anything in particular that's worth noting from that last few minutes? In terms of what you've seen, in terms of what people have said, anything that kind of springs to mind?
The guy who works at the activity place, where he was saying that everyone can feel included and they can join in, and it's like they're getting exactly the same out of it as everyone else. I think that's like they are adapting to everyone. Like, obviously they're tailoring to people's needs, but like they're making sure that everyone has the same experience if they want to. Then again, that's up to the personal choice and like respecting their and like knowing them and their individual needs. But yeah. Nice,
thank you very much, Flo. So yes, I think what that chap, I think he was called Ben, kind of says there, do you know what, perhaps this is the first time they've come to an environment which is set up with their needs in mind. As a result of that, yes, we do still tailor things, but realistically everyone has got access to the same activity. They might be doing it in slightly different ways, but they're all there together. And he used that phrase inclusion quite a lot in terms of that. So, thinking about what he said, thank you for sharing that, Flo. When we think back to special schools, I'm going to stop sharing that bit at that point, if that's okay. When we think back to special schools, we said on that diagram, realistically, special schools kind of fit there, seen as being segregated. So yes, very much those learners are separate. They go to a different type of school setting. As a result, that might mean people see them differently. They might view themselves differently. However, thinking about the school itself, and like the Calvert Trust place that they'd gone to, is that school perhaps better set up with their needs in mind? As a result of that, are those learners being segregated because they're in that special school, or are they being included? Or is it a bit of both? Or is it somewhere in between? Okay, so just to kind of finish that bit off, those learners go into a school like Ysgol-y-Derry. In one sense, they are segregated because they've been transported somewhere else, quite often out of their community, to attend this specialist setting. That specialism is not available in their local school. Are, though, those learners being included? Okay, so why do you think that? Putting you on the spot.
Still included they're still given an opportunity to learn, like they are all like learning at their own pace and at their different ways, respective of their capabilities. And some of them, in the documentary, you can see them using like fobs on the doors and pins, and like obviously some of the children I've worked with, they elope. Like if they see an open door, that's really dangerous. They could just run into the road. There's no sense of personal safety. So having places that are just a little bit more secure and a little bit you can see in the corridors they're wider, so it's not all packed together, and they have sensory rooms and stuff. To have that those places in that school, they are included in that, and that place is for them. But they can still access what everyone else is doing, just at their own pace.
Fab, thank you very much. So, anybody got anything to expand on or disagree with what Flo said? Or are we all kind of in agreement in terms of that? I'm in agreement with you, Flo. So realistically, I suppose whether those learners are included or not potentially goes back to our definition of inclusion. So if inclusion means this, that's not working out, this, all learners together in mainstream school, then arguably those learners were not included because they are here, they are separate, they are somewhere else. However, if inclusion isn't based on physical placement, and do we kind of see inclusion as a learner's needs being met, as feeling a sense of belonging, as having an opportunity to achieve, if we look at inclusion from that perspective, even though, yes, they are here, are they being included? Would some of those learners be as included if they were there? Potentially, might they miss out on opportunities or experiences or different ways of learning? Okay, so where I was kind of going with this, I suppose, is when we think about inclusion, most of the definitions focus on this, realistically. It's the responsibility of regular mainstream schools to meet the needs of all learners. However, other definitions don't focus on placement. So Welsh Government, for example, talk about inclusion. It doesn't matter if it's mainstream or special school. The key indicators of inclusion is not where pupils are taught, it's whether their needs are met and whether they feel that sense of achievement and belonging. Okay, so I'm going to pause there and give you a quick comfort break if you want one. It's 11:20 now. If we kind of reconvene in about 5 minutes time, and then what we're going to do, we're just going to take that on a little bit further, and I'm going to show you 2 other video clips shortly in terms of thinking about inclusion of learners who are a little bit older. So this one is called Derwin College. Again, I might have shown some of this previously. I apologise if I have. As I said, I'm a middle-aged man. My memory is not what it was. So we're going to think a little bit about learners who are a little bit older. And then we're also going to think a little bit, this is an example of a community called the Camp Hill communities, which engage with adults with learning disabilities and disabilities right across the lifespan. Okay, so when we're thinking about inclusion, does it stop when we get to 18 and we finish school, or what does it look like afterwards? Okay, so I'll pause there for 5 minutes. Thank you for humouring me so far this morning. right. Yeah, that's okay, no problem. So feel free to do what you need to do. If you need bathroom, go and get a drink, by all means do so. Oh. How are you, Akagha? Are you okay? You have a nice weekend?
Yeah, it was nice.
Good. Did you get up to anything?
No.
And no, the weather wasn't great, was it?
The weather was so good.
So how did last week go? All okay?
Yeah, last week was perfect.
Good. So I think you mentioned there was issues with getting onto the app last week.
Yeah.
Have you still got issues with the app, or has that solved itself a little bit now?
Yeah, I have been trying to sort myself out.
Okay, and is it fixed now, or is there anything I can chase up for you to help with that?
No, it's fine.
It's
Thank
okay
you.
now.
Yeah.
Okay. So you went to research methods with Janet on Tuesday last week, and
Yeah, I was with Janet last week.
fab. And was it the digital?
Yeah, because I don't know the actual lectures. I need to run for practice.
Fab. Okay. And did you do as a digital education with Berry on Thursday?
On Thursday? Yeah,
Yeah.
I was with her on Thursday.
Yeah. So quite different modules in terms of the contents. Yeah.
So the thing is so confusing.
Yeah. So there you go. So is there anything I can help with or follow up at the moment, or is everything okay?
Yeah, everything's fine.
Okay. The other thing I was going to ask you, Akagha, if you don't mind, is do you have access to a laptop?
I have an access to a laptop before. My laptop was spoiled last time. So I collected the laptop from the library and I overused it and they gave me a fine of £80.
Wow, okay.
So which I haven't paid off. So I'm trying to get the laptop soon.
Okay, that's all right. The only reason I'm asking is on Monday the 9th of March,
Yeah.
that's when they're doing the in-class test.
Okay.
And
So I will try to get a laptop before then.
so what I can do is I can see if I'm booking us into a computer room.
Okay.
So I just need to check with timetabling that there is a room available at that time.
Okay.
If there isn't, then what we can do is sort out access to the laptop.
Okay.
As realistically, you will need to be online
Okay.
on the laptop to do it in that time slot.
Okay.
Alright?
Yeah. On the 18th of March, right?
So it'll be Monday the 9th of March.
Okay.
So if we're in a computer room, I will let you know in advance and I'll send you a map of where the room is because I don't know where they are, I want to be honest. A lot of the computer rooms are really big and there's only 5 of them. So we'll see if we can kind of find a smaller one which is a little bit less intimidating.
That's fine, thank you.
And then the only thing I would suggest before that, Akagha, is just make sure that you've logged on to the system previously.
Okay.
So sometime between now and the 9th of March. There have been people in the past where they had issues on the day because the system didn't recognise who they were, and that caused them a lot of stress trying to get onto things. So if you have a chance to kind of do that over the next week, maybe,
Okay, next week.
and then next Monday we can catch up and just check it's all alright.
That's fine, thank you. Thank you, I really appreciate it.
That's good, no problem. So apart from the weather, everything's going okay?
Yeah, everything's going to be okay, I'm fine.
Oh, that's good. All okay with you, Tia?
Yeah, all good.
Good.
Yeah, Jessica.
She's not very well today, so she did email this morning to say she wouldn't be in. Okay, so before we start back properly, has anyone had a chance as yet to start working on the in-class test lesson plans? And it's entirely fine if the answer is no. Okay, if there's anything that you want me to take a look at that you've done so far, just let me know and I'm happy to do that. So we can do that at the end, we can meet up another time, you can just email it to me to take a look at, entirely up to you. But what I'd like to build in over the next 3 sessions or so is maybe 10 minutes at the end, where if you do have anything that you brought with you that you want to share and we can take a look at, then we can do that. As I said, realistically, the aim of that in-class test is that you've pretty much done 70% of it before you turn up on the day, and then you get the information about those 3 pupils. So I've shown you on Canvas those examples of the one-page profiles. For example, we saw Felix's one up on screen then in the school. So anything that you want me to kind of go over or check with you before then, please do so. And then what we said at the start of Gaga, next week we're going to start to take a look at dyslexia as an area of need. The week after we look at autism, the week after we look at something else. And I'm not saying definitely those are going to be the needs of the test, but the chances are they are before I'm going to go over them with you. So it's an opportunity to start to think a little bit about those as well. Okay. Right, so I'll start recording again if that's okay. Right, so quite a few things then that you were thinking about in terms of that Ysgol video. Now, you said, Flo, you've kind of got quite a soft spot based on your experience for those types of schools. I would say I agree in terms of that as well. However, there could be a different person standing at the front who kind of went, actually, those should all be shut down, and those learners, there's no justification for those learners being taught separately. Actually, what we should do is change the education system to make sure that those opportunities are available in their local setting. Okay, so I suppose one of the things we see in this model, that there's no right answer and no one right way of doing that. So just thinking about these next couple of questions on the board there. So I think you answered that one, Flo. Do you think the school promotes inclusion? So seems to be meeting their needs even though it's somewhere different. Thinking about what you've just watched then, is there anything that you think mainstream schools could learn from special schools like Ysgol and anything vice versa? So is there anything that you think, do you know what, that's quite good to what I've seen there. Maybe if we took that back into mainstream school, that would be helpful. Equally, is there anything that you think, do you know what, mainstream school does that differently or does it better? Anything that could go the other way? So I was putting you all on the spot a bit and trying to answer 4,500 years of education debate. But anything you think there that, do you know what, that's really good. If I was working in mainstream school, I would like to see this there. Or alternatively, actually, I don't like the way they do that. I think mainstream does this better. Okay, so I'm going to leave you kind of think about that in the background. The next bit then maybe is a little bit easier to answer to some extent. If you are a learner with needs, so like Felix or Finn or Josh, for example, or Mair, are there benefits for you of attending a special school? Equally, are there any disadvantages? Okay, so if we think about that one briefly, do you think there are benefits to some learners attending special school settings? So Flo, you've got a huge nod going on there. So what would you say would be some of the benefits?
Like I said, with like children who like are known for show like unpredictable behaviours and also like challenging behaviours towards themselves or others. So like I just the only like reference I have to like a normal school is like schools that I went to, and I'm just thinking about the secondary school. It's just really cold, and like a lot of people like it wasn't. It was just a mainstream school, and a lot of people were like kind of forgotten under the like with like mental health stuff and like safeguarding issues that would have absolutely been brought up in this, because there's smaller class sizes, like they can have their big personalities and still be like looked out for. And I just think like a special school like that, like it's also the parents, like they now have a community of other parents that they can relate to, like whereas like that might be like like smaller in a mainstream school, they'll feel like more like okay with sending their children on like residential, knowing that they'll be like cared for and like looked for better. Yeah, I don't know. I just think like especially like schools like that and like inner city schools, but special schools, although they do take children from like possibly like hours away, I think the facilities that they have, considering like the state of education, like politically, like economically, like we basically like take what you can, and like where the special schools are providing that extra support, I think like it's kind of a no-brainer to go there.
Oh, thank you very much. So potentially then mainstream schools can be impersonal, especially when we're thinking about large secondary schools. As teachers, do you get the time to be able to get to know your learners? So you've got a class of 35 learners that change in front of you every 45 minutes during the day. Do you get that opportunity to understand and know your learners to the same extent? So potentially advantages. Anybody think of any disadvantages of attending a special setting?
I think, sorry, you again.
That's okay, you go.
There can be like discrimination or feelings of like us and them, especially like from mainstream schools. Like there was always like, oh, you should go to the special school, like that is like a kind of like a joke or like a horrible thing to say something to someone. But I think like stuff like that can be really easily overturned by like basic education for like respect for other people. Do you know what I mean? Like where there's like horribleness and discrimination or stigma, like if there's just like a little bit of like, I don't know, like some schools they do like placements within special schools like for children who like people who want to do like health and social care and stuff like that, and just that mutual understanding that like nothing's wrong with them, they're just like having a different time. Do you know what I mean?
Great, thank you very much. So a lot of complex things to unpack in terms of that answer as well, Flo. So I like the point you've made. Maybe it reinforces that us and them. Maybe it reinforces that difference. However, those learners in the setting, maybe there wasn't us, but in terms of wider society, there is that us and them. And because some learners are still separated as a society, do we still have those kind of deficit views of people who are different? And again, I can't quite remember your words, Flo, sorry, but that bit about, you know what, these learners aren't lesser, they're just different. And as a result of that, they learn in a different way. So maybe normalising that difference is something that could be done better across society. Thank you very much. Anybody else got any thoughts before we move on in terms of that? Any advantages or disadvantages in particular of attending a special school?
Yeah, I think the advantage of a special school and the mainstream schools is that a lot of students in the special school has disabilities, while in the mainstream they are okay. So the kids they get more attention. Staff or teachers, the kids in special schools, they got attention from staff, teacher. They love the communication, interaction with teacher is different from the one they will get from mainstream schools.
Brilliant, thank you very much. So kind of unpicking that a bit, maybe the structure of the school day is different.
Yeah, it's different.
Yeah, the structure of classes is different. Maybe the curriculum is different. Maybe assessment is different. Yeah, so maybe the advantage is you are being taught in a place that's been set up to meet your needs rather than having to try and fit in and very often being seen as being a deficit within that system that you don't fit into. Brilliant, thank you very much. So just moving on, there's a few things I want to go through with you in the next 15 minutes or so. I'm not going to ask you to do this group task now, but this is something that you might want to follow up on. So I've put a reading on here. It's quite vintage now, it's from 2017, so it's almost 10 years old. And this was talking about the impact of inclusion. So back in 2017, Shaw talks about the fact that over the last 37 years, so since 1980 basically, so following the end of the Warnock Report and the expectation that schools become more inclusive, she talked about the fact that ever since then, there has been a continuation of special schools, And as we said earlier on at the start of the session today, in Wales there's actually been an increase in the number of learners who attend special schools. So what is going on in terms of that? So why is it when we're trying to be more inclusive, whatever that means, we've got an increasing number of learners who are still taught somewhere differently? Okay, so there's a reading that I've put up on Canvas if you want to kind of follow up with that moving forward. The final thing I wanted to mention today realistically focuses on these two pictures here, and I've hyperlinked a video to each of these. Now again, I might have shown some of you this first one from Derwin College. Now Derwin College I think is really interesting. It was set up almost 100 years ago, 1927, so it's 100 years old next year, and its original name was, I've written this down because I couldn't remember this morning, the Derwin Cripples Training College. So realistically this was set up like some of those institutions we saw last week for a very specific purpose. The person who set this up had a physical kind of handicap herself, thinking about the terminology at the time. Despite that, she ended up training to be a nurse, and she became an expert, and she ended up getting a damehood later on in life, partly for setting up this college and this community. So what was the Derwin Cripples Training College has by today become Derwin College, and realistically it's an FE college which supports young adults from the age of 16 up to 25 and offers kind of a hybrid higher education, further education type experience and opportunities. So in some cases this gives young people the opportunity to kind of leave home and live in an education type setting with support. So it's a little bit different to living in one of the halls of residence over there, for example. So many of these learners do live in kind of shared housing, so maybe 4 or 5 students with a live-in support worker in many cases. So it's building those kind of independence opportunities. But also one of the things that Derwin College I think does really well is, as well as supporting kind of living independence, it supports post-education outcomes. And what they try and do is build people's opportunities to go into employment afterwards. So I'm going to show you a very short clip of a trailer of a longer documentary programme, which I've put the link up to on Canvas as well if you want to follow it up. And Derwin College is quite famous in the area, so this is kind of on the North Wales Shropshire border. It's set up, it's got its own garden centre, it's got its own farm, it's got its own farm shop, it's got its own restaurant on site. It's actually got a partnership with Premier Inn Hotels, for example. And Premier Inn have built a miniature 3-bedroom training hotel on site, where part of the things they do is they support these young people to basically go and work for places like Premier Inn in the future, or to go into hairdressing, or go into kind of working in a cafe, for example, or working in gardening or farming. So very much in terms of supporting kind of routes into employment. So potentially thinking about some of these learners years ago, the expectation would have been realistically there was nowhere for these learners to go. It gives these learners an opportunity of that kind of independent life experience, but also the opportunity to build skills to go into employment as well. However, the flip side of that, it is a separate college. It is separated in the sense that only young people with learning disabilities or disabilities will attend, and they are still separated away from elements of mainstream society to receive this education. Now I'm just going to show you a quick clip. It's only a minute long or so.
John's very fun. He likes to be happy. He likes to be around his friends and have a bit of a giggle. He is definitely the lovable one. He's the soft side, but he wouldn't like you to think he's got a soft side. He's half man.
What is the gangster lifestyle all about?
Guns, drugs, smoking, drugs, fighting.
It's not a very healthy lifestyle, is
Not very gangsters. Some gangsters they fit, they've got its back. Is okay to fat or slim or junky or smooth.
Which type are you?
Me smooth and 6 pack.
You work out a lot.
Yeah, I work out in the gym 1,000 times.
John's gang is part of a much wider group of friends who are all leaving in a few weeks' time.
That photo 5. I've got John.
It includes Dan and Lissy, a couple who have been together since they started here 3 years ago.
Oh no.
So DJ's tips.
No, I'm precious.
John is kind of okay, but sometimes he gets a bit too much.
Okay, so this comes from a documentary called Life Begins. Again, it's a little bit vintage now. I think John is great. I think all of the learners that you see in the clip, if you choose to watch it, are great as well. And realistically, you can see some of the kind of the different needs that are there. Some of those needs quite visible, some of them less visible. When we think about Dan, for example, really interesting story about Dan and Lizzie in the video, who, as it says, that had been kind of a couple all the way through their 3 years in Dedwin College. And at the end of it, although they're in their kind of early 20s now, they are moving back home with their individual kind of groups of parents, and both sets of parents are adamant that their relationship should not continue. And actually their parents split them up and don't allow them to see each other following the end of college. So, and then it kind of talks about what they do to try and overcome that. So all sorts of challenges around independence, autonomy, control of your own life, for example. But again, thinking about kind of, John the six-pack chunky gangster, for example, all sorts of potential challenges there. Would there be opportunities kind of in sixth form or local FE colleges for a lot of those learners to attend? Possibly, possibly not. Do settings like Dedwin College, which are quite few and far between, give opportunities? I think they do. However, the fact that these opportunities are separate, are they being included or not? Okay, so these individuals are kind of learning skills to go and work in society afterwards. However, they are learning these and developing these in a way where they are separate from society. So all sorts of kind of challenges around inclusion there. And then the final one I'm going to show you is just a quick example. You might have heard of the Camp Hill communities previously. Now, the Camp Hill community started off kind of the 1930s in Scotland, and realistically they were set up by refugees fleeing Nazi Germany and Nazi Austria in particular. And what they became was kind of intentional communities where adults right across the lifespan with learning disabilities and non-disabled kind of individuals chose to live together in a particular community. And what we see in the Camp Hill communities is kind of shared housing. You might have a non-disabled individual living as part of kind of a group with learners with disabilities, for example. And although this isn't one of the first groups to do this, lots of people have done this over time. I suppose there's a couple of things that come out in terms of the ethos which might be seen as being inclusive. So one of the things that underpins this is that all lives are important and all lives are worth living. And the second thing that came out was, in terms of these communities, what they didn't try and do was replicate a sense of home. What they tried to do was develop a genuine home for all these individuals who've chosen to live together. So I'm just going to show you a quick clip of part of this, and then again we'll kind of come back to inclusion.
Amazing place called Camp Hill. And then I said, okay then Mum, I'll look and see what we do. And I absolutely loved it since I seen it.
Valley Capital Community is a community that consists of a group of people of all ages and abilities who have consciously decided to live together in a meaningful and purposeful way.
Here, you are in a group of people who come from different walks of life, have different abilities, but all have a common goal, and that is let's make this community better, let's work for each other. And you can't ask for more than that. I mean, that's the way the world should work. We should be working for each other. And that's Esk Valley Practice. That's what they do.
I think gardening. Gardening in the rain and listening to the trees blowing in the wind. That makes me happy. I work in all kinds of weathers. Rain, very heavy rain sometimes, very, very light rain, and I'm just enjoying the work.
My son James came here when he was 26, so it was 20 years ago, but we'd started looking for residential provision for him when he was about 16. We knew that we wanted him to have an independent life where he would be supported but safely.
When you come to Camp Hill in Esk Valley, you are not a service user. You are living in a house for shared lives, and I feel safe in this little place.
One of the unique things about this community is that we create meaningful, real work opportunities, and you can see that in the outcomes that people are living happy, healthy, fulfilled lives, and that's what we strive for.
I would say what holds us together, what is the glue in this community, are the residents. We really need every single person who lives in this community. We just do. Because everyone makes a contribution to our workshops, to our houses, to our personal lives. Yeah, I don't know how we would not live in a community and manage all the things that we manage.
I love it here because I'm living in Rowan. We have our own bedrooms downstairs. I sleep next door to Magnus, and we have fun together in the sitting room, just chilling out sometimes and listening to the radio.
Edward's got an autonomy from being here, and he's got responsibility as well. He's got responsibility for himself, but he's got responsibility for others as well.
Here, Edward lives within a community, within a family, and it's because of that that he has flourished beyond belief.
I think the family setting is really important for Thomas because it gives him structure, it gives him a sense of normality because he's come from a family.
A rhythm to life is really important, not just for the people that we support, but for everybody. You feel really held by a rhythm, especially if you have autism. That rhythm is incredibly grounding and protective. The daily rhythm is we get up, we share breakfast together, then people will go off to work and be at work until 12 o'clock or half 12 when lunch is served, and that again is the household community event.
My parents, they feel very, very, very happy about me being here. They're in retirement age and they can't look after me, so I'm more than happy to be here because I've got Hanson and Lisa and other people here too who can help me, and I feel like I've got like a second home.
It's a nice place to live because...
Okay, so apologies, I'm going to pause that there. So, any thoughts in terms of Camp Hill communities? Yeah.
Yeah, it's like it's quite fun. Like everyone's just doing their own thing. Like the goal is community and like making everyone happy and like and growth towards it's all just very self-contained.
Yeah. Okay, so thinking about some key words that kind of come out there, I'm going to come back to self-contained in the second flow, thank you. Did we see elements of inclusion, I think, in that video? I think the word community came out an awful lot. I liked the parents at the start who kind of went, well, do you know what, this is what every community should be like. And I agree, but are our communities like that? In practice, probably not. Talked about independence, talking about people having autonomy, people having worth, people having jobs to do. I liked the lady who talked about we're not seen as service users, we are members of the community. So that different perspective towards valuing everyone as individuals and everyone having a role to play. So all sorts of different descriptors there that kind of link to that definition of inclusion. However, a lot of these communities are quite discrete, they're quite separate. Again, kind of like that special school approach, these are particular communities that are separated from the wider mainstream community. So are these individuals included within those communities? I would say yes. Arguably, are these individuals included within wider community? Possibly not, potentially around the fact that they are kind of self-contained and they are bounded. And there is another clip which I can't find anymore, which was looking at one of these communities in Ireland. For example, there's 37 of these across the UK at the moment, and there was a volunteer who'd come over to work in the community from Brazil, I think it was, and he talked about the fact, and he said it far better than I'm trying to realistically. He said, despite the fact that we live separately from everyone else, I've never felt such a sense of inclusion as what I do within that community. Okay, so again, all sorts of debates in terms here. Is this inclusion? Is this segregation? Are people included within a smaller community rather than people being included within a wider community? Like we saw in Ysgol y Derry, do these individuals seem to be happy? Do they seem to have a sense of autonomy? Are their needs seemingly being met? I would argue yes. However, are these individuals still separate and segregated from mainstream society to some extent? Yes. Okay. So, I'm going to stop talking in a moment or two. So we've talked about quite a lot of things. Each of these points we've kind of mentioned today could be a master's degree in its own right, realistically. So tried to fit in quite a bit on quite a shallow surface level, I know. If anyone's got any thoughts who wants to pop this up onto the Padlet after today, please feel free to do so. I think it's quite helpful sometimes to look back on these closer to assignments and see what people's thoughts and feelings were at the time. There is a bit that I've popped up onto the Padlet which asks you, for example, using literature to support, are there advantages and disadvantages of attending mainstream or special schools? So maybe thinking about informing your assignments going forward. If you do any background reading and you think, oh, do you know what, that could be helpful, if you just want to pop the link to the literature on that Padlet, and then it's there available for everyone rather than everyone trying to find the same things independently. As we said earlier on, then the in-class test is now a month today. So if you do have drafts that you've been working on over the next few weeks, please bring them with you or send them through, or we can arrange to kind of meet up in person or online outside of sessions just to check that they're on the right lines and you're happy with those. And then, as I said, what we're going to do next week is start to focus on specific learning differences, and in particular dyslexia. Is my alarm telling me to shut up? So we will, as I said, think a little bit about possible causes, impact, strategies and support. So other than that, thank you for listening this morning. I know it was quite challenging to do that when it's such a small group, but thank you very much. Any questions, any concerns, any issues? Okay, so I will stop recording.